Hamel Husain, staff machine learning engineer at GitHub, as well as a key contributor to fastai. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, so one of the main reasons I wanted you on here was because you are active on Twitter, and you're one of these ML Twitter ninjas where you can just kick off a thread and a bunch of people pile in. And one particular thread caught my eye recently is something where you were basically just thinking out loud about CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous deployment in the context of ML. And then it kind of drew a lot of people, a mixture of people answering your question. Some people saying, we're already doing this. Some people saying, this is impossible. But as a way of background, so what prompted you to push out this tweet? Was it something that was something you wanted to do yourself, or what was the motivation behind the tweet?
Yeah, I guess like the motivation is I continuously hear people talk about how they don't have good observability into their models, and especially with their workflows, like their software development workflows. There's not an analogous thing for machine learning that allows people to test their models before merging a PR, for example. And because it's kind of different than there's a lot of things that you have to account for there. They're different than traditional software development, even though there's quite a bit of overlap.
So this general observation is based on your experience and conversations with people?
Yeah, based on my experience with conversations, just generally, I think I saw it a lot on Twitter also. And then just saw it a lot on Twitter of people saying that. Or actually, you know what? To be very specific, I saw a PR where someone said, someone was making a change to a model, and the comment in the PR was like, "Hey, does this make the model better?" And then the reply was, "Yeah, it makes the model better." And it's just
didn't you have a follow-up tweet basically recasting it in this way, which made it more crisp?
Right. Yeah. And basically, I keep seeing this PR over and over again. This is the PR that haunts me. Different versions of the same PR. The comment being, "Hey, you made this change to the model, but is it good?" And some people are like, "Yeah, I think so. I think in my experience is better." Or here's a screenshot of a Jupyter notebook, or here's something else. And none of those answers, all those are really problematic to me, and it's problematic to everybody else. And so I just kind of got tired of seeing this poster child for ML CI/CD.
To our listeners, might this be the equivalent of, if you're a web developer, basically? Yeah, I think this won't bring the site down.
Yeah. Basically, it's you have no tests. Maybe you have certain tests, but you still have this lingering question, should this code really be merged? What changed here? What is the outcome? What is the result of this change? And that can be very ambiguous with machine learning. And so the idea is you don't want to guess. You shouldn't have to guess. That's broken. Why are we doing that? And the reason I made that, so the Twitter thread was commenting on, hey, this CI/CD for ML has never taken off, even though this concept has been around for some time. And the reason I said concept has been around for some time is because I linked to a previous kind of project where we showed at least more than 2 years ago how to do this with various technologies. Now, given it's a little bit complicated, you have to string together an experiment tracking system with the ML workflow system, and you have to be using GitHub Actions or something like that, some kind of CI/CD system where you can integrate all this stuff. It's kind of advanced. And so I was just commenting on, okay, we keep seeing this problem. why hasn't CI/CD for ML taken off? And I was just
so didn't you kind of answered the question in some ways, and the complexity of the tooling and things like this. But by the way, Hamel, so have you been paying attention to this? So there are many startups in kind of various aspects of MLOps. None of them have probably all of the components you need. You will still need to string together the pieces. But the reason I bring them up is some of them have actually been thinking about some of the aspects that you're talking about, specifically this notion of, should we, before we push an update out or a new model out, should we have some steps along the way? Maybe formal testing, unit testing, and so on and so forth. But more importantly than that, maybe we should have a paper trail that, hey, this is Hamel's model. Ben is doing the checking. Ben already checked, and so on and so forth. So they're kind of documenting, and this is more common to vendors who sell, for example, in regulated industries like financial services, where they have formal regulations about models, but they don't have all the tools that you're describing to make it, crisp. And yeah, I wonder how far away are we from that? It seems like it will be a while, just because there's many aspects, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of startups, and I've talked to a lot of them and continue to talk to many of them. And I think, so the Twitter thread was kind of lamenting on like, why hasn't this taken off? And like, as you said, one is complexity. So perhaps better tools can solve the complexity problem. But another dimension is, which I was like sort of asking, is maybe people just haven't reached this level of maturity yet. Like it's not even about tooling. It's like, so maybe there's not that many people putting machine learning models into production as we think they are. And then also maybe, like, if we are putting in production, we don't really have, there's not that many people that have use cases where they're sort of, it's just like kind of a very small scoped problem. Maybe they're not making that many updates to a model or anything. They're just kind of, they don't need this kind of elaborate framework.
I guess the other question is, prior to CI/CD and traditional software, what the heck were they doing?
That's a good question. I actually don't know. I actually don't remember software prior to CI/CD. I don't know what that looked like, but it must have been pretty crazy.
So I guess the other way to answer this question is, what does CI/CD bring to traditional software that someone had to come up with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it brings just a lot of stability,
rigor,
a discipline of testing, and just higher quality stuff. Higher quality software with really no additional friction. And it's not. I don't think. I mean, it takes some work to stand up the CI/CD system and like write your tests and stuff like that. But I think at this point, people agree that the trade-off is worth it. Like, you should test your code, you should set up automated testing, and it tends to save you a lot of time.
By the way, one area where this seems to be slightly more mature than compared to models is in pipelines. So the pipeline engineers are starting to talk about injecting software engineering rigor in the way they build pipelines, because as you know, in companies you've got pipelines all over the place, and people lose track of what's happening, who built this, who depends on this, and so on and so forth. And then once you get to that state, then when you have to make a change to a pipeline or update it, so what's the process? So I think the data engineers who are involved in this area seem to have had more pressure to get it right. So maybe, Hamel, maybe this is one of the reasons why, for example, in financial services, in the way they push models out, they have more rigor because they have a regulator. So,
Right. Yeah.
maybe part of the problem is that there's no sense of urgency in plain ML yet.
Yeah. I mean, so I think like part of the Twitter thread is sort of a little bit of a cynicism of, why are people using ML in production? Like, is there really value that people are capturing from ML, or there's a lot of people doing ML just for vanity's sake? And can there, we don't have really good systems that monitor ML, and I see a lot of cases like this. And some people responded with yes, that may be the case. Like, we're still trying to grasp. There's a lot of sort of exploratory ML, or companies doing ML, but not fully like figuring out how to capture value from it.
By the way, I have this term that I came up with recently. I call it one-off ML. You know how in a big company we always talk about deploying models for production, monitoring, updating. But you know what? There are many models where you build it once and it answers a question, and you may not rerun it for another 6 months if you do, right? But then don't you also want to have some of the things that you want for a deployed model, meaning how did I build this model? What data did I use? All of the artifacts, just in case, God forbid, 9 months from now, someone asks you to redo it, right?
Yeah, no, totally. You definitely want that. And right now it's a big pain to create all these things. I mean, you have to, if you're trying to do this as a data scientist, either you have to bring a lot of different tools to the table yourself, like 5-6 different tools to the table, potentially, or kind of make something up on your own.
Or work with a vendor, but then you're in that walled garden where you're using the vendor's tools, right? So
yeah, I'll work with the vendor. Now, a lot of times it's like kind of hard to work. I mean, it depends. Like, a lot of times when you're at a company, it's hard to just buy software. I mean, you have to go through a procurement cycle. You have to ask your boss. They have to do a security review. All kinds of stuff have to happen before you can work with a vendor. So a lot of times, like, data scientists not able to. They have so many things to worry about as it is.
or
Going through procurement cycle,
probably you and I are not the type of data scientists who would work in such a company.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because basically, I still want to be able to choose what I'm using, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It would be hard to work in that environment, but a lot of people are working in that environment.
By the way, so going back to your kind of canonical example of someone saying, "Hey, I updated the model. I want to push it out. I think it's good." So first, so to take a step back, so we know people monitor models, right? So we know that they at least have some notion of, hey, this model needs to be retrained. So then I asked Hamel to retrain the model. So Hamel retrained the model. So then doesn't that eliminate your concern? Because the reason Hamel wants to push the update is because someone told Hamel to retrain the model.
Yeah. So yeah, let me share a story about GitHub that may be interesting. So as you know, I've been doing a lot of open source work on fastai, and recently I've been asked to kind of look at our machine learning pipelines. And so we have some machine learning pipelines in productions, things that like recommend repos and projects for you to follow. And so this particular machine learning pipeline is retrained every single day and launched to production. Now, when I saw it,
retrained every day just because.
Just because. So it's like you're already zoning in on what I'm going to say. So basically, it's the model is retrained every day and is just launched to production there's no comparison against a baseline, or there's no comparison against an incumbent model. And so when that's the case, and then there's certainly some evaluation on a holdout set, but that's just emitted to the logs. So what that means is you're not even evaluating the model at all, because you're just evaluating the model on something and you're whispering it into the trees. But the evaluation has no teeth, because you're not evaluating against a baseline, you're not evaluating against an incumbent model or anything like that. So you might as well not be evaluating it at all, because it's not doing anything. And so basically you have machine learning that's not being evaluated. And then you can argue that this is not machine learning because you're not evaluating. So because if you're not evaluating, you're not doing machine learning.
Which goes back to a point you made earlier, which is basically what maybe people should question whether they should deploy ML at all.
Yeah, it does lead to the question. And I see this all the time. I'm just picking on GitHub because I can, but I've seen this many different times. And it just, then you start going down, you asking more and more questions like, okay, well, you know, it is a symptom of a larger problem, which is, well, why is this model being deployed at all? What are the goals of this model? So on and so forth. And you can go on and on. And I think you're right. Like, people are being told, hey, you need to retrain your model on specific cadence. But there isn't, people are just told that. And kind of there's this performative, so sometimes performative act of machine learning to kind of say, hey, we are using machine learning. But that kind of closing the loop on like what the business value is, or even without business value, what is the model doing, thinking very rigorously about that, it can be lacking.
So in other words, people who say, oh yeah, so we look at all these metrics and we have this fancy dashboard and it triggers some alert to some machine learning engineer, and this person does some kind of incident analysis to figure out what's wrong. Why is this model underperforming? So this is not happening. Huh?
No, in this case, I mean, there's certainly downstream metrics that people monitor, maybe of like what is happening with this recommendation product. But certainly that's the wrong place. As a machine learning practitioner, you don't want to rely on those downstream things. I mean, you want to evaluate your models at least. And yeah, I mean, it's really easy to fool yourself that you're evaluating models. Like in this case, the models were evaluated on a holdout set and just being emitted to the logs. And then at least at some point, somebody was convinced that the model is being evaluated. But you step outside and think about the bigger picture, you're like, oh no, the model's not being evaluated at all. You might as well not evaluate it. And so, yeah, I think that's like a larger issue. And it was kind of like a discussion on social media about that too.
So the interesting thing about your thread is, this whole notion that, so this meme that was going around a few years ago, software will eat the world. And of course, ML will eat software. So if ML will eat software, but if ML has no rigor, we're screwed. The way people build and maintain ML, I mean, has not much rigor, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I wouldn't get too carried away personally with the word rigor. I mean, I think it's okay that people don't it's okay that ML is an empirical science.
No, by rigor, I mean they have the software engineering practices rigor.
Oh yeah, the software engineering practices. Yeah, I think so. I think there's like a lot of different issues that are at play here. One is that machine learning practitioners, they're being told that, hey, to be a real ML person, you need to be a really good software engineer first. And by the way, you need to use all of the things that software engineers use. Now, I think that's a little bit, I actually don't know if that's a good idea. I mean, I think we're asking data scientists to move what they're doing to a different domain. The tools are not meeting them where they are. And so that never works. When you don't meet the user where they are, it just doesn't work. We can't ask data scientists necessarily to become software engineers. Maybe they can learn some things from software engineers, but I don't think we should wholly expect that they're just going to adopt all the practices blindly and, you know, force their workflows into that. And I think that's one of the problems that we have. And then, like, I think another problem is more general in the sense that a lot of people are hiring data scientists or engaging in machine learning projects for vanity or for sort of more PR related reasons. They don't really have like a good reason for doing ML to begin with. And a lot of people just jump into ML. It's like, hey, we have this product, let's throw some ML on it. But, you know, let's optimize it with ML. But do you try to optimize it without ML first? No, you know, a lot of times the answer is no. And so I think there's like a organizational problem and then sort of a tooling problem that kind of interplay here that make it the state of the world how it is.
So going back to the tooling, so one of the things that seems to have taken somewhat of a foothold in the last few years is experiment management, right? So this is ML flow, weights and biases, Comet, these kinds of things. So that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Before experiment tracking, it was just like it was horrible. Like it just you know, email lists of like conversations like, hey, I changed this about the model, I think it's doing better, or like Excel spreadsheets where like different people would add like their different experience. It was just like horrible. As soon as I saw something like weights and biases, immediately knew, okay, of course, like I have been waiting for someone to make that.
Right. So what other parts of the tooling have you liked in the last few years that are somewhat relatively, you know, forget about libraries for building models, just kind of infrastructure kind of tooling?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I think like is an interesting word. I don't think, you know, I think a lot of the tooling has a lot left to be desired.
Or how about use instead of like?
Oh, use. Okay. Yeah, use. So one really kind of novel answer I'll give you that maybe people are not familiar with is, so working on fastai. So Jeremy Howard, who runs fastai, he is really maniacal about developer productivity. Like he optimizes everything about his developer workflow, like in a very crazy way, in a good way. And so what that means is like, so that manifests itself in a couple of different ways. One is he made a bunch of extensions to the Python programming language in a library called fastcore, but then also, very interestingly, made his own development environment called MBDev, which is a notebook-based, it's a literate programming environment. And literate programming is like a term that we can talk about if you want to, but essentially it's a literate programming environment based upon building on top of like Jupyter notebooks and static site generators and some other things and gluing them together. And I think that is really interesting. And the reason I think that's really interesting is, so in the data science world, we keep hearing this debate about notebooks. Like, don't use notebooks. Notebooks are bad. They lead to bad practices. They lead to sloppiness. You should be more like software engineer. Don't use them. But people still use them. Like, and so why is that? It's because there's a tension between like the traditional tools and notebooks, exploratory tools. There's not a great like something in the middle that encapsulates the workflow really well. There's not a great development environment that just fits everything a data scientist wants to do. And MBDev is a window into what that world would look like if you're trying to develop software in a regime that kind of looks a lot, you know, has like, you know, where you're trying to iterate and experiment a lot. And, you know, it's a window into that. And I think that is really exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the fundamental developer tools. So this, you know, even beyond, like even before we get into infrastructure and model serving and model monitoring CI/CD or anything like that. I think people still feel a lot of friction at this very like lower state of just like developing like software and writing their software, writing tests for it, writing documentation, and all that stuff.
So the data scientist cohort seems like they do prefer notebooks, right? I'm not sure if there's enough of a cohort around machine learning engineers to make a similar statement. Maybe they prefer IDEs. I don't know. I mean, I personally actually in the last couple of years, I moved away from notebooks to VS Code for some reason. I don't know why. I just ended up doing that, but not for any resentment around notebooks or anything. I just someone turned me on to VS Code and I liked it. Right? And then there are these new tools like Streamlit, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Streamlit. I'm not sure. I think that is aimed at developers wanting to build data applications, right?
Yeah, Streamlit is really interesting. Like, there's also a technology you could use. Like, you could kind of fuse Streamlit with the VS Code in a way to do some kind of literate programming, to have some elements of that. Like, if you wanted to be less notebook and more IDE, you could get some elements of the literate programming feeling by kind of gluing together Streamlit with VS Code. But it would be different. It would be like a little bit different. It would definitely be a different set of things you're tackling versus MBDev. But it's still related. So I think, but yeah, I think there's a lot of things there. And I also use VS Code a lot myself. I just know that there's some other tool that exists that can be made that can fuse sort of these two things together, like the experience of a notebook and the experience of an IDE, kind of the best of both. That's what MBDev convinced me that is possible.
Or I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Brett Victor.
Yes.
Oh yeah. That was my kind of fantasy tool.
Yeah. I think Brett Victor kind of inspired MBDev to a certain degree. Like I know Jeremy, like when he has definitely cited Brett in his launch post, I think.
Right.
So,
but by the way, this conversation around tools reminds me of just this whole notion of, let's say, so you're in a company where they're actually deploying models to production, but so the people building the models are building them in notebooks, but the prod people have, maybe different requirements or different tooling, right? So right there's a disconnect. And then now people are using this term MLOps, so which to me, by the way, ops always has three components. There's the notion of monitoring, automation, and incident response, right? So that, to me, that's ops. I don't know if that exists in ML at this point, honestly. So the fact, Hamel, that you have the people building the models, they may be, in many places, they're different from the people deploying the models, right? I mean,
yes, yeah.
You're not gonna just let a data scientist push a button and deploy, right?
Yeah, a lot of places separate the two. And this kind of goes back to, you see the same thing you've seen the same thing in software engineering for a long time, where they had DevOps people and software engineers.
Right.
For a similar reason. And they tried to break down this barrier as much as possible. They keep trying to break down this barrier with, different success. And I think basically we see the same thing, same effort going on in ML. And I think like you're right. Like a lot of people are sort of writing code in Jupyter and then trying to migrate that.
Yeah, like for example, Hamel, when you were in Airbnb, so you got the data scientists working in notebooks, then what?
When I was at Airbnb, so the models I developed there, I definitely prototyped or explored in notebooks, but then, I definitely.
So then what happens? You give it to someone?
No, I was not able to give it to anyone. So my Airbnb experience was very unique.
Okay.
I wouldn't say call it unique, maybe different than what you might imagine. So I joined Airbnb in around 2016 or something like that, maybe 2017. I can't remember. It's 2016, yeah. And when I first arrived at Airbnb, my first job was to audit a growth, like a forecasting model for growth marketing. And the way this model was built was, it was an R script that somebody ran, like some linear model. And what it was is it generated like a bunch of coefficients. This person copy and paste the coefficients into an Excel file that had a bunch of formulas. The formulas constructed a SQL query, and then the person copy and paste the SQL query into Airflow. And then that was the machine learning production system. Like that was like a version of a machine learning production system at Airbnb at this time. So I was like totally blown away when I saw it. I thought, oh my God, like this is Silicon Valley. I joined Airbnb. You know, I thought when I was coming to Airbnb, this is going to be really advanced. Like I'm going to see like something really interesting. Now there's certainly different pockets of Airbnb at that time that had like more robust infrastructure, but this is what I saw. And so like part of when I was at Airbnb is I had to build some of this. I had to build infrastructure because when I saw that, it's like, okay, we have to stop. Like we can't, this is not going to work. So yeah, I mean, there I had to build a lot of stuff, and then, you know, I didn't get to complete the building of the stuff, but it definitely laid the foundation for some of what came after, which was the things like Big Head, which is a product, which is a internal ML framework that they eventually developed.
By the way, we're talking about data scientists not deploying to production. There's actually a bigger cohort coming, man. I hate to scare you.
Okay, what is that?
There's a new movement around this so-called low code, no code. So basically, the idea here is that low code may still mainly touch developers, but you know, the tooling will expand to make it possible for more people to build software related products or do data analytics. And so, you know, you can so one way to think of it is if you look at a website, right? So in 1999 or 2004, you still had to hire someone to build a website. Now you've got all these no code tools for building websites. So the idea here is that maybe there will be pieces of what we do that will gravitate towards this low code, no code. And you're gonna actually already see pieces of this, right? So there are, I mean, you can think of Airtable as no code database, right?
Sure, yeah.
And then the ETL tools, there's some of them, and then there's some modeling tools that can be used by analysts, right?
Yeah.
So
like
now,
in a robot.
Yeah. So now you know, you go from people using notebooks and not being able to push out what they're doing to now this potentially larger cohort of people, right? So
yeah, I mean, I think I'm okay with that. Like, you know, in the sense, you know, I don't necessarily think there should be any gatekeeping per se, but this interesting analogy you made.
And by the way, after all, Fast AI has the best tagline ever: making neural networks uncool again, right?
Yeah, actually, the ultimate ambition of Fast AI is to make ML available to everybody, not just people who code. Exactly. At least, like the main, like, at least that is the ambition, to say, like, make it directly available to domain experts. So, like, you know, short circuit the software developer and say, like, hey, we give it directly to the radiologist, directly to the farmer, directly to whoever.
So basically, it's going towards that kind of low code.
Yeah, that's the ambition. I mean, there's long ways to go for that, but and so, like, yeah, I certainly think that's good. But, you know,
so we need to have the platform and infra tools to keep up with this wave of participants, right?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, potentially. I think that like with the low code websites, um, they seem like they work really well for prototyping and like mom and pop shops. But as soon as you get to like large scale stuff, you still need to hire a web developer at some point because you get, and I think
For now.
for now, I mean, I guess
Isn't that kind of part of it? So take a specific instance of this WordPress. You've
Mhm.
got plugins, right? So you need a form or a wallet plugin, right? So
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, So I think there's a lot of mom and pop shops using WordPress and stuff like that. I don't know if there's anybody at the scale of Airbnb using WordPress, but
CNN.
CNN is using. Okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I wonder if CNN has, you would think they would have some front end developer. Probably just accelerate the productivity, maybe. Hopefully, it's used in a way that accelerates.
And also the customization of the look and all of that, right? So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes it, and I know Shopify is very popular, for example.
But for the rest of us who may not want to go into the innards of WordPress, right? So.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's fine as long as people, I think this is a learning process where kind of the best practices are sort of built into the tooling as much as possible. So it's like for model evaluation, the way to think about, it's hard to extract. There's certain things that it's hard to imagine tooling giving you for free, such as like having good, like framing the problem properly, thinking about how to evaluate, not necessarily carrying out the evaluation, but how to evaluate, for example. And then like measuring your model, like, coming up with good metrics, communicating the value of that. Those are really all critical for being a data scientist. And I don't think like tools will totally automate that way. Like, for example, Data Robot is a good example. Like they completely automate modeling 100%. And when that platform was first released, there was some pushback by data scientists, like, "Oh, like, what do you mean? Like, this machine is just gonna do the modeling part? And what about my job?" And my response would be like, I don't know about your job, but modeling is the last thing I want to focus on.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Tuning parameters and choosing this algorithm versus this other algorithm and adding a layer here, doing. I always thought that was really boring for me.
Plus, if you build one classifier, how many classifiers do you want to build, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's to me is the most boring aspect of data science, to sit there and fiddle with models too much. And so like I think it's okay. Like I think these no-code platforms, I think what we'll first see is it'll allow data scientists to become more productive and free them up to actually think about things, so they don't do things like launch models into production every day without evaluating them, things like that.
Or finding even better data to feed into their models, maybe, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Hey, by the way, so I did want to ask you, so what does a machine learning engineer do at GitHub?
That's a good question.
What are the manifestations of ML in GitHub?
Yeah, so ML is still kind of nascent at GitHub in terms of, there's some products that people can see. So if you go to github.com/explore, you'll see like some recommendation stuff to, for example, or if you create a new repo, there's something called topic tags where you can give little tags to your repo, and you'll see like a recommendation system kind of at work there. So there's a couple of things like that. Other than that, there's, as there's Codex, there's a Co-pilot.
And the ambition is, what's the ambition for ML at GitHub?
I think the ambition is kind of to, power various products and new features that they have and make developers more productive generally.
So the classic data products that we used to call.
Yeah. And so ML engineering at GitHub it like will look very different for different people. Like some people focus on modeling. Some people like me have been focused on infrastructure, just because I gravitate towards that. And so, yeah, there's various new features that we are experimenting with, like for developers, like new products for developers in GitHub that may be powered by machine learning. And so like people are working on that. There's GitHub Co-pilot, which you may have used, and we've had a couple of ML people work on that, not in the modeling part, but in the evaluation of this thing. So yeah, there's a couple of different activities going on.
By the way,
There's
GitHub Copilot is low code, right? It's a way to get you to low code, because basically you're going to use Copilot to make yourself more productive and write less, right? So
yeah, that's really interesting that you say that.
Yeah.
So my feeling about Copilot, yeah.
Because the thing about low code, by the way, Hamel, is there's no precise definition. It's like big data.
Yeah, no, totally. I'll be curious what your thoughts about Copilot are. For me, I actually don't. I like it. I like to use it for more declarative things like YAML files, maybe SQL and things like that, where I don't really. There's not really an understanding to be had. It's more like you just want to specify this boilerplate stuff. Like a lot of it is boilerplate, and you will want to just.
Yeah. That's exactly a great use of it, because basically if you like to code, then you're going to code, except for the parts you don't want to code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, like for me, the code is not the art. Like the ultimate goal is not the code.
Right.
The goal is like to understand the business process and to design it and kind of really, the code is just like an artifact of what is produced, but you really have to understand like what is happening. I think that is like really useful part of software development.
By the way, another usage of Copilot might be, you need to use a certain framework or library. Let's just say, pandas or whatever, right? But who knows all of the ins and outs of, there's so many functions in many of these libraries. So this is a way for you to get to what you're doing faster.
So this is where being a machine learning person really helps you in thinking critically about the way Copilot works. So if you think about like machine learning algorithm, what's happening? It's taking a bunch of data. So let's just say the corpus of GitHub, and it's building a like language model on that, like what GPT is doing essentially. And so like what you get is sort of so what happens is like you end up getting like old API usage. You kind of get like what the average developer is doing by definition, because and so that can be dangerous, because like, if you want to develop software, sometimes it is good to like open the docs and say like, hey, what is the newest version of this API that the way I'm supposed to use it? Number one. Number two, like maybe you don't want to do it the way the average developer is doing it, the way everyone else is just doing it, because it's basically going to find the most common usage of the thing that exists over time and feed that to you.
It may not be the most efficient.
Yeah, it may not be the most efficient, or it may just not. Yeah. Especially something like pandas, which not their entire API surface area doesn't change that much, but it's certainly some parts of it do, and it's good to like think about, I think.
Yeah. And by the way, in closing, so give us some up and coming things for fastai.
That's a good question. You probably have to ask Jeremy about that. I think it's I know they're coming out with a new version of fastai. They're actively working on that. They're actively working on a new version of MBDev.
So how much time do you spend on fastai? Because you have a job.
Yeah. So I actually haven't been working on fastai for about 5 or 6 months, because I got pulled back into GitHub to do this internal infrastructure, and then I just had a newborn about 2 weeks ago. So I'm on paternity leave.
Yeah.
So I haven't been working on it actually for a bit. So I would have to ask Jeremy because
Yeah.
thinking can change like very fast. I don't want to
Yeah.
misquote anybody.
And with that, thank you, Hamel. This has been a great kind of meandering talk about MLOps and machine learning in reality, as opposed to machine learning in aspirational, I guess, aspirational machine learning. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.